So thanks for attending this session on our bite-sized session on test preparation for the math test. We've put this in, so the bite-sized sessions are all in response to what people want and the kind of things that we see that people struggle with more with certain topics. And one of the things that came up for maths for a number of people is they feel fine with the topics and they can do all the calculations, but as soon as it comes to doing a test, it sort of all goes out the window. And that's not uncommon, and we're all programmed to do that. As soon as we're put under any kind of test conditions, it is more difficult to perform, and we do get that. But obviously, the more you can know about the test in advance and the more you can prepare for it, then hopefully the better you are for it, so that you can give a true reflection of your ability. If you would sit a test and you weren't ready for it in terms of the maths and you didn't pass it, that's not unexpected. However, if you're perfectly competent and working at the right level and then don't pass the test because of, let's say, test technique or nerves or whatever it might be, that's obviously a real shame. We wouldn't want you to do that. So what I'm going to do in this session is go through what's included in the maths test so you're all clear. Some of you may know, some of you may have sat this test before and are resitting it, but so some of it you might know, but I will go through what's included, talk about some of the common mistakes and the key terms that come up, and I'll give you, if you like, a model answer. We'll work through a test question. And as I say, I'm not going to ask you too many maths questions, but I will ask you a couple in here. So in terms of the test then, functional skills underwent changes around about 12 months ago, and I think the vast majority, if not everybody on this call, will be on the new version of functional skills, which is called Reform. If you know that you're on an older version, this is slightly, this slide is slightly different for you, but you would probably know that by now anyway. And if you're not sure, you can always ask your tutor afterwards, but I'm going to assume for 99% of the people on this call, this will be relevant. So the test for math is a 1 hour, 45-minute test that's actually split into two separate sections, two separate tests. They do have to be sat at the same time. But for the first 25 minutes, you are complete questions without a calculator. You're not allowed a calculator. There are 15 marks for this session. And within there, you get 10 what are called knowledge questions. You might call them pure maths. It will just give you, it won't give you a scenario or details. It will just say, what is this number times this number? And you just expect it to work it out. So they call that the pure knowledge questions. And then there's 2 or more problem solving questions. Again, still not using a calculator. So some tests you might actually get 15 questions. They're all worth 1 mark. Or usually the knowledge questions are all worth 1 mark each. That's 10. And then you might get a 3-mark question and a 2-mark question. Something like that. So you're around about 15 questions in that first section, and 25 minutes, a short amount of time, but people generally feel okay with that kind of time, and it's about right for that. Once you finish that section, and you need to do that one first, you move on to the second section. You're not allowed to go back to that first section, so see them as 2 sort of separate tests, if you like, that you are sitting back to back. So you sit that one 25 minutes and you go, right, you take a 3-second breather, and then you're straight on to the calculator section. For this test, you're given 1 hour and 20 minutes, so more generous with time, but there's a lot more in there, and you'll see that this is worth 45 marks, obviously quite a lot more within this section. There are usually 5 knowledge questions, and they're usually at the start of that section, so they'll be just straightforward, work these calculations out, but you have got a calculator to use. And then are usually followed by around 9 problem-solving questions that can range from 1 mark up to 5 or 6 marks. Usually 5 or 6 is the maximum. It doesn't usually go over that. And there will also be 1 answer check in there. I'll explain what that means in a short while. So different kind of skills that you use in there, obviously calculator and non-calculator, but also you're a lot more problem solving in the calculator section. And so that is a different style of question to approach. And it may be a 5-mark question. So there's a number of different calculations in there. You've got to work out the area of something, then take off 20%. And then work out the price of buying some lawn seed for that area. So there's a number of different calculations you get in there. You do get marks for showing you working out. I'll explain how that works in a little while, but one thing to reiterate is you are asked to show your working throughout, and you do get marks for those working. I'll explain how that works in a while. So that's the structure of the test. The topics in the test are the topics we've been going through in our bite-sized sessions, and you'll have been going through with either myself or whoever your tutor is. And they come under 3 broad areas. One is known as use of number, and they are things like, as it says, probably a bit more pure maths. Again, we might talk, it's about things like fractions and percentages and ratios and using numbers to find out some information. There's measures, shape and space, which are involved in things like distance and time, money, maybe angles, area, perimeter. We've got a number of, we've got 3 shape and space sessions happening on Friday. If you're not signed up to those, you may wish to. And then the final section is called handling data. And as it suggests, it's either the test will either give you some data and you've got to extract some information, maybe from a table, or they'll give you some information and you might have to produce a chart. And it's also data such as things like averages and range. There are a number of things that are other included, but they sort of come under those 3 broad headings. One thing the test doesn't do is it won't say this is a measure, shape and space question, and they will jumble them up. So all of those things will come in, and some will be problem solving, some not. But you get an idea of the kind of topics that you need to be thinking of. And you'll see anybody who does any work on Skills Forward, the system we use, and also many of our presentations and things, you'll see we use terms like measure, shape and space, use of number and handling data, the kind of terminology you might see. So a really useful thing I always think is every awarding body, and we use, as you probably all know, City and Guilds for our tests. They produce on a fairly regular basis an examiner's report, usually I think about every 6 months or so. So they'll take the last 6 months of tests and they'll look at the common things that people are getting right and the common mistakes people are making, and they sort of give a report to tutors such as me and say these are the things to look out for. There was one produced just before Christmas, I think it was, maybe just after, that I thought might be useful to share some of the findings, if you like, from there. So this is what the markers are saying they see in it. They feel there's a good understanding of bid mass, averages and range. If you're not sure what any of those terms mean, again, I can definitely recommend some of our previous functional skills bite-sized sessions covering bid mass, sometimes known as bod mass, and averages and range. So those are things I think people are quite good at. One thing they're very aware is accuracy. So there was a comment saying there are many tests, many examples of people making very small mistakes. So some of the examples they gave is where they would work something out and show it in the working, but then when they transferred that answer to the actual answer box, which I'll show you in a while, they change the answer, or they're doing something that they say they're going to add things together and they've actually taken it away. So accuracy is really important, as I'm sure you appreciate in maths. It is typing a 7 into the calculator when you were meant to press 8 can make a big difference, or 1 decimal point to 2 decimal points, 3 decimal points can make big differences. So it's important to be accurate. One thing that they feel there's happening a lot is people not transferring their working to computer. So I can't remember the exact words they used, but they basically said it was clear that people were doing working out, but then only putting their final answer on the test. So they're doing working out on pen and paper. There's much pen and paper to do notes on, but not transferring that working to computer. And again, I will explain how the marking works, but you need to show your working ideally, not just giving the final answer. So that's something that's key. Rounding answers. They felt that a lot of people weren't rounding their answers effectively, including rounding to so many decimal places. So if a question says gives you a number to the nearest 100 or give it to 2 decimal places, you need to do that. If you didn't attend the functional skills bite-sized session at some point this morning, and we did actually cover that, both decimal places and rounding generally. So I would strongly encourage that one. And again, that's one of those that would be a real shame. If you worked out the answer correctly and you've got 72.4, and it says round it to the nearest whole number, that'd be 72, and you put 72.4, and you'd actually lose the mark. Now, you've actually done the right calculations, got the right answer, you just haven't rounded it correctly. So to me, that'd be a real shame to lose marks for that kind of reason. Diagrams and charts, which is always a bit of a bugbear on the maths test. So the computer-based system for testing does include software that enables you to draw diagrams and draw tables and charts. And the feedback the markers are giving, and I can definitely vouch for this from seeing some practice tests that people have done, is people aren't using the software correctly. So they may understand how to draw a chart, but are not using the software correctly. And it's not an IT test. So that's the first thing to be aware, that it's not expecting you to have massive IT skills, but it's a shame, again, if you know what to do and you don't do it properly using the software that's on the screen. One thing you can do prior to your test, you can, and it's a little bit awkward at the moment because of some technical issues, but it is possible for you to be able to go online and see a version of how the chart system works and how the diagrams, and actually have a bit of a play with it, play with the system. And I would strongly recommend that to anybody. There is also a graphs and charts webinar that we've got recorded. So if you haven't seen that, then ask your tutor for that and we can send that out. But that is definitely something that I said people are losing a lot of marks on. Not because they don't necessarily understand what to do, but it's how to do it using that software, which again is a skill in itself. And one thing I wanted to mention that has recently come to light is people often ask me about the pass mark for all tests, but particularly the maths test. The pass mark does vary. So every test is marked out of 60 marks, but what you need to get to have passed the test does vary. I mentioned before that functional skills underwent a change probably over 12 months ago now. But obviously the last 12 months have been a strange one for all of us, and so there's not many tests have taken place. So a lot of tests from City and Guilds haven't been moderated as much as they would like. Obviously the old tests, hundreds if not thousands of people have sat them, and they can work out that the average score is around X, so therefore pass mark is whatever it might be. The pass marks are varying quite a lot at the moment, and I'm sure my fellow tutors will say that they've seen some tests where people have got relatively high marks and not passed, and also people have got what you consider low marks and have actually passed. So it is difficult to say. We normally talk around the 60 to 70% pass mark, and I know we tend to work on 70% would be pretty much guarantee you a pass. So that's something to aim for, but you may be able to get lower and still pass, but pass mark is varying at the moment. Not that that particularly matters, because when you're doing the test, obviously you want to get as best as you can, but it is useful to have in the back of your mind sort of that kind of buffer zone that you've got. So one of the things that has come up as well is some of the problem areas that have been highlighted that people struggle with. Now, obviously, we haven't got anywhere enough time to go through all of these, and there's quite a long list to them. But these are the areas that have been flagged up as functional skills, the new maths functional skills that people tend to be struggle with in times of questions. So they include these things on the screen: circumference of a circle, surface area, 3D volumes, coordinates, angles, scale diagrams, and planned drawings and side elevation. As I say, I'm not going to go through all of those, but there is resources for all of those, and I've got some more to show you in a moment. There are resources for all of those, and we've got bite-sized webinars. I've mentioned things like circumference of a circle and volume is coming up in our sessions on Friday. But if you're looking at any of those and go, yeah, I'm okay, but actually I know I struggle with angles, then that may be something that you want to think about focusing on. Those are the sort of measure, shape, and space ones. And the other ones that come up on the right-hand side, and it's adding fractions, comparing percentages and fractions, I think, or reverse percentages, combined probability, and group means. All three of those we actually did bite-sized sessions on a couple of months ago because we knew they were problematic areas, and they are some of the most difficult things in maths. Approximation, I'm going to mention in a short while. Speed, distance, time calculation, which people sometimes struggle with. And a big one said is that learners consistently don't put in the units. So if a question is in centimetres and your answer is 70, you need to put in 70 centimetres. Sometimes you'll see on the question it's got that in for you, so you don't need to type it. If it isn't, you must show your units. And particularly for money, it's quite common that people don't put pound signs and things for money, or maybe put that the price is 70.9. Well, obviously money, we wouldn't say 70.9, we'd say 70.90, £70.90p. So it's important that your units are correct. So I'm not putting those up to scale. You're going, oh my God, there's loads of areas there that everybody's struggling with, and I struggle with all of those. That's not the point of that. But I just want you to have a think about those. And if there's any areas that you know you personally struggle with, maybe that's worth making a note for yourself. Just say, right, that's something I'm going to focus on. Yeah, just think about more before the test. I was just having a look at the chat, and I can see Sam's put a link in there, so hopefully that's useful for people, and we can send all the links. So one thing I want to look at is some of the keywords that come up within the test and things to look out for. And two of them are pretty much interchangeable. And the words explain and describe. And when you see them normally, you say, okay, I understand that. Explain means I've got to give an explanation, and describe means I need to put some detail to it. But a lot of people in the tests aren't doing that. And so there's an example of a test, real test question there. And I haven't included it all because we're not going to work through this one. But it's about a report and it's about a graph, and it says, is the report correct? So you've got to tick yes or no. And if you just tick yes or just put no and don't put an explanation, you won't get any marks, because even if you've got it correct, even if the report is correct and you've ticked yes, the marker needs to know that you've understood it. And it explicitly says explain here. So they're not worried about you working out. They're not worried about how you came to that answer. They want to know what your answer means. So is the report correct? If you put yes, you could put an explanation. The report is correct because according to the graph, this, and the report says that. Or if you put no, the report is incorrect because the graph says one thing and the report says something different. And so you need that kind of level of an explanation. So it's not an IT test, it's not an English test either. So we don't need War and Peace in there. You don't need to worry too much about spellings and punctuation and grammar and those kind of things. But you do need to explain in detail. And I do see that a lot where people will give an answer, maybe even show they're working, and I'll work for an example a bit, but don't actually then go on to explain their answer or sometimes describe it instead. So that's a key one that definitely to look out for. If it says explain, it wants a bit more information from you. Next one, I'm going to show you this question. I'm going to ask you to have a go of it, if that's okay. So the question is, and again, it's from a real practice test. A man has a fish tank with the following dimensions, and you can see the dimensions hopefully on screen there. And the question is, he needs to know the approximate volume of the tank. What is its approximate volume? So if you've got pen and paper or a calculator, give that a go. If you're unsure how to work out volume when you've got a three-dimensional, nice rectangular shape like that, all you need to do is multiply the three dimensions together. So we've got the three dimensions, length, width, depth, whatever you want to call them, there. And to work out volume, you multiply them together. So looking at that question, look at the information you've got on screen. Can you take a few seconds to work it out and give me your answer in the chat window of what you think the answer will be? No bonus prize for the first person. So we've got one answer, so I know somebody can do it, so that's good. Any more answers? I will allow, I think this is a calculator. I think this is actually a non-calculator question, but I will allow calculators for this one because for time. We're getting lots of the same answer of 28,536. I can tell you this test is so this question is a 2-mark question, and what people have put there is only giving you 1 mark. Nobody at the moment, just checking the chat again, nobody has got 2 marks. So I'm going to see if anybody can change their answer. And I'll actually tell you, nobody's got the right answer, actually. A few people are saying to include centimetres cubed, which you would for volume, which is great, and that is part of the answer, but would still, so if you look at Heather's answer there, would still only get you 1 mark, that would. So have a look at the question again. Can anybody come up with a different answer? Okay, a few more answers coming through. Okay, so it's a bit of a naughty question, this one, and I'm not a big fan of it. I didn't write it. It is from the test, but it's a real question, and again highlights the point of the key words. Eamon's given us a tip of rereading the question. The question specifically says, what is the approximate volume? So those who worked out 28,536, you're correct. 24 times 29 times 41 is how you'd work out volume. Correctly says that the volume of that fish tank is 28,536 centimetres cubed. So in reality, that's correct. The question doesn't say what's the volume, it says what's the approximate volume. So what they actually want you to do in this case is to work out an approximate value. And actually what they're suggesting you would do here is you would do 25 times 30 times 40. Rather than the actual figures, 24 times 29 from 41, you would actually use an approximate value. And so that you don't think it's me lying or being particularly awkward with you, I'll show you the mark scheme. So this is taken from the mark scheme. And what this is saying is out of the 2 marks, if you got 30,000 centimetres cubed, you would get 2 marks. And that is from doing 25 times 30 times 40. If you got the volume of 28,536 with the centimetres cubed in, you actually only get 1 mark. Now, that is it's a strange question. You don't see this all the time. And again, I would argue it's a bit of a naughty question because it's sort of, to me, if you've got the exactly right answer, then you should be getting the mark. But the question does specifically say, and it mentions it twice, it uses this word approximate. And it does want you to work out the approximate value, not the exact value. So as I say, in this one, what they're looking for is 30,000. This also gives me a good chance to talk about the mark scheme. So the mark scheme, the way it works is you'll get a certain number of marks for getting the question right, and then they'll offer you a certain number of marks if you haven't got it right, but you've done certain things. So this one's a fairly short one. You can see that to get it right, if you get 30,000 centimetres cubed, you get it exactly right. If you haven't got that, but you've shown you're working, you may be able to get some points. So if you've got the answer of 28,536, that's fine. Or what they're suggesting there, if you've done a different approximation and you've reduced all those down, so you've done 20, rather than 24, you've used 20 times 30 times 40, they'll still give you a mark. So they're sort of giving you an idea. That's where showing you working something useful. So I've particularly chosen that one. The word approximate does come up. One thing that to be aware of when you'll often see approximate is I mentioned earlier on, there will be one mark check or check mark within the test. And what that means is that somewhere in the test, they will ask you to check your answer that you've done. They'll actually do a calculation, it might be worth 4 marks. And there'll be a separate box at the bottom will say, now check your answer. Basically, there's a number of ways of doing this. One of the easiest ways or the best ways is to do an approximate answer. So let's take this question. If we get rid of everything I've just gone through and the question said, what is the exact dimension? 24 times 41 times 29. And then it said, check your answer. What you could do is you could round up and round down and do an approximate answer. And if your approximate answer is almost the same as the right answer, you know you've got it correct. Another way you can check your working is you could do a different method. Now, it'd be difficult with this because the method to work out volume is multiply those 3 together. There isn't really another way to do it. So it'd be difficult in this example. But sometimes, certainly if you're using fractions and percentages and those kind of things, there's usually more than one way to work out the answer. So if you have worked out the answer and you've got whatever the answer might be, and it says check it, do it a different way. And if you get the same answer again, then you know you've done right. But one way of checking your answer is an approximation, which is the example I've shown there. They will, in the old version of functional skills, that used to be common. They used to ask you to check your answer 3 or 4 times. They do say they'll only ask you once now. It'll only be worth 1 mark. It isn't so. as important as every mark is, it isn't the most important thing within the test. It's something to bear in mind. They may ask you to check your answer, and one way you can do that is approximation, like just done there. Another key word is, and I just mentioned it then, is about checking your answer. And there's two ways to this. One is the check, like I've just mentioned, where you do a calculation and then you do a different version of the calculation to see if you get the same answer. But another kind of question where they actually check, and actually this one, they don't actually use the check, but what they're doing is they're wanting you to work out whether you think the question is right or not, or the situation is right or not. So this example says a parent fills in a medical form about a 2-year-old child. The parent measures a child's height with a tape measure and writes the child is 3 meters tall. The receptionist at the surgery basically thinks they've made a mistake. Is the receptionist correct? So there's not a great deal of information there. You're not expected to do any calculations. This is only a 1-mark question. Just in the chat, can anybody tell me if they think the reception is correct or not? And if, well, and why do they think that? So I'm not expecting any calculations or conversions or anything like that. Just from there, the parent measures a child. Do we think the receptionist says that the parent has made a mistake? Is the receptionist correct? Emma saying no. A no is probably yeses. 1 yes. Emma said no, then meant yes. And I have put this question in particularly for that reason as well. I know Sam mentioned this earlier. So the answer for the question is the receptionist correct? The answer is yes, the reception is correct. And the reason for that, and actually I've taken it off the screen, but it does say explain why you've chosen that. It says that the child is 3 meters tall. Now, without doing any calculations or converting it to feet and inches or anything like that, 3 meters is taller than a house. And I don't know many 2-year-old children that feel taller than a house. I know sometimes they feel like it when they're running around going mad. They can feel like they've taken over the whole house. But children generally, well, nobody is generally 3 meters tall. I don't think there's anybody in human history who's ever been that tall. So we know the parent has made a mistake. So that's the first thing to note. Is I haven't had to do any calculations, but I just know from reading it, I'll do a sense check if you like, and that can't be correct. The key now then is the receptionist correct? The receptionist thinks the parent has made a mistake. We know the parent must have made a mistake because the child comes 3 meters, so the receptionist is correct. So it's not saying is the parent correct, or is the child 3 meters tall, or is the whatever. It's saying is the receptionist correct. Catherine's picking up my key tip, number 1, read the question. So it is all there. Again, I often get asked, I'm sure the other tutors do, are there any trick questions? And there aren't. There's no such thing as a trick question. All the information is there. You just need to read it and read it again, basically, and check. Once you've got your answer, read it again. Does it make sense? So in this case, the checking means 2 things. One is that you're not actually doing any calculations, you're checking the scenario, but also check whether you answered rightly or not. So 2 things to think about if you are asked to check, or if you do want to check, is does the answer make sense? So in this case, does it make sense that a child is 3 meters tall? No, it doesn't. And also, how the previous example I gave is how else could I check that? One thing I do actually suggest that sense check, I would suggest doing that with all of the questions that you approach. If you're asked to work out the average of a set of numbers, and you might look at the numbers and go, well, I can see they're all around 50, so the average is probably going to be 50-ish. And if you work it out and you get the average of 52, you think, yeah, that's kind of what I expected, that's great. If you work it out and you got the average of 240, something somewhere's gone wrong, and so you'd need to go back and do your calculations. I will use the example. There's probably lots of people on this call have heard this example before. When I did my functional skills test many years ago, one of the questions was about working out the number of rolls of carpet somebody would need to, they were building a hotel, and how many rolls of carpet they would need. And I worked out the answer to be 50,000 rolls of carpet. Now, I don't know how much that is, but to me, 50,000 rolls of carpet just sounded ridiculously too big. And I just knew the sense check was that can't be right, because 50,000 rolls of carpet would carpet probably the world, certainly not a hotel. What I did, went back and my questions, and I realized I'd missed a decimal point or changed a 0 or something like that, and it was 50 rolls of carpet was the answer. My maths I thought was perfectly fine, and that, when I got 50,000, so if I hadn't thought of the scenario and had just left my question thinking my maths is okay, that would have been all right. But the sense check was 50,000 rolls of carpet doesn't sound right. If you're doing a scenario where it's about buying a car and it comes to £3.50, you know you don't usually get a car for £3.50, so there's something somewhere you've done wrong. So it's always worth doing that check of your own answers, whether they ask you to or not. So, having gone through some of those tips, I'm going to work through a question with you, and I will ask you to do some questions, some working with me as well. Just need to share something else with you. 3. Okay, so again, this is another real practice test question, you can see, and some of you may have seen this before. So I'll read through it, and while I'm reading, just think about how you would approach it, and then you can do some of the calculations as well. So a woman applies for a new job that pays £8.50 a week more than her previous job, obviously, and that's after tax. She works 5 days a week and drives to work, which she does in her current job, and the new job is 6 miles further from her house. It tells us that a car can travel 8.5 miles per litre of petrol, and petrol costs £1.26 per litre. You've got that right. The question, so that's our scenario, that's the information. Again, if you're in the real test, you might want to note some of that down so you've got it ready for you. But the question is, will the woman be better off with the new job after she takes the petrol into consideration? And again, the key thing here, we've got two things it's asking. One is to explain your answer, so we've got that explain word, and one is include calculations to support your decision. So we know we're going to have to show our working, it tells there, but we also need to explain our answer. So I'll work through this. It's going to be a bit awkward to keep going forward and back, so I'll work through it. If you want to do it alongside me, and do. It's one of those questions where there's a number of ways to work it out. I'll tell you how I would do it, as if you like, as a model kind of answer. Well, first of all, she's going to be working 5 days, and she's traveling 6 miles further. So 5 days times 6 miles is 30 miles extra. Check that on the calculator. 125 times 6 is 30. So she's doing 30 miles extra. One thing I've remembered though is it says the job is 6 miles further from her house. Well, she's got to drive there in the morning and home on the afternoon. So I'm going to type return journey equals 60 miles extra. So all I've done, I haven't written 30 times 2 because it's pretty obvious what I've done there. And all I've done is to include the return journey. I know that she's now doing 60 miles extra. Maybe I'll put in per week just to make it really clear. And again, I could have worked this out on paper as well at the same time. The next thing I personally would do, well, I know that if she can do 60 miles, she's got to do 60 miles, and it's 8.5 miles per litre, I've got to do 60 divided by 8.5. It's not easy to do a divide symbol on the computer, so a backslash like that, or you can write divided by if you want to. And I'll work that on the calculator. Now, I'm just going to show you, actually, I don't think it will let me share my calculator at this point, no. Bear with me a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my calculator as well, so you can see both things. Okay. If I do 60 divided by 8.5 on my calculator, you'll see my number is 7.0588235, blah, 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 blah. One of the general rules in maths is the longer you keep the number, the more accurate it would be. So I could actually round that number up to 7 because the nearest whole number is 7. But I could also write in all of that number. What you want to try and do is keep the number as long as possible. As I say, the longer it is, the more accurate. So what I might type in here, what I'd suggest typing here, maybe 7.0, if I remember it, 588. Oops. 7.0588. So I've gone to 4 decimal places, which is quite accurate, really. That's quite good. So I've worked out that that is how much petrol. Oops. Do that. Need. I know that petrol costs £1.26 per litre. So I can do 1.26 times my 7.0588. And if I go back to my calculator, that gives me 1.26, should tell me £8.8944 and so on. Now, we're talking about money here, so I know I can stop after 2 decimal places. So actually my figure here, and I remember it's money, so I'm going to put a pound sign, is £8.89. So I worked out that this person is going to be paying £8.89 per week on fuel extra. Could even write that in. I'll now go back to my question, and the question is, will the woman be better off with a new job? Well, the question says she was going to be paid £8.50 a week more. So she's not going to be better off because she's going to be paying £8.89 in fuel out and earning £8.50 more. So she's clearly not. So 2 things I need to do. 1, I need to put no in the decision box. If I don't put no in that decision box, I'm not going to get the mark at all. No matter how what I put below, that's where my answer is going, is no. And then below down here, it asks me to explain my answer. And I might put, she would be paying out £8.89 is 39p more per week in petrol than she earns. I could, if I want to go on, put something like, and the car will have more use, and there's longer journey times, all those kind of things. But the question is, will she be better off? No, she won't be better off because it will cost more. So that, if you like, would be my model answer. And what I've done there is I've shown my supporting calculations. I haven't put every little stage I've done. I haven't put 30 times 2 there, and I haven't included everything I've done, but I've put the key things, and I've put some of the key findings. So £8.89, 7.058 litres of petrol. And then key, at the bottom, I've put my explanation. I haven't just put no. That question's worth 4 marks. If I take you back to the presentation and show you the mark scheme, So on the left-hand side, if I describe this, the 3 in bold is the most marks I can get for the right answer, which is £8.89 travelling extra, which is what I got. If you remember rightly, I got £8.89. So I'm getting 3 marks for £8.89. But I also get a mark for for comparing my calculated cost with the increased pay, £8.50, and my decision with my explanation. So this is where by putting no and by putting my explanation at the bottom, I'm picking up an extra mark. So that's where I'll get the 4 marks from. So it says comparison of the calculated cost and decision with explanation, just comparing the values, or mentioning, like I said, you could mention servicing costs and wear and tear on the car and those kind of things. So if I hadn't put no in there, I'd have lost my mark. If I just put no, she'll be paying out more and not included £8.89, I would actually be getting 3 less marks. So if I had not included any of this information, because I worked it all on paper and I know it all, so actually I've worked it on paper, so I'm going to put in there no, because she'd be paying out 39 for. I can only get that bottom mark there, and I would have lost out on 3 marks. Question does say is include calculations to support your decision. So actually it's telling me to include my working out, but that is something quite clear. Something else to note, well, very common on this question, a lot of people don't do this stage where they recognise it's a return journey. So they say they learn that the woman's doing 5 days extra at 6 miles each time is 30 miles extra for getting into return journey. We go back to the mark scheme, you'll see for 2 points, if you look at the third point, or £4.45 for travelling the extra distance based on journey one way only. So this goes back to where we're showing you working out. If you've made a mistake because you've only done 30 miles, where it should be double that, you still potentially could pick up 2 marks from this question because it gives you that mark there. If you do nothing other than working out at 60 miles per week, you can get a mark. So actually, if you haven't got the right answer but shown somebody you're working and shown the stages you've done, lots of potential to pick up marks. Now, that's a 4-mark question. Obviously, it could be a 6-mark question. It may only be a 1-mark question, so it isn't quite as detailed or intricate as that, if you like. But it's important to think about those marking. So just to finish off, I'm going to give you some of my own top tips, which are copyrighted, but I will allow you to use. Sam, Eamon and Sophie, I did warn you. Have you got a top tip that you would give people in relation to the maths test particularly?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Go on, Sam, well done.
No, there's absolutely tons, to be honest. And obviously this session you've just done here, Paul, I think is going to be really useful, and I know I'm going to be sharing it with people pretty much every day for this kind of foreseeable future. The key thing I think that Paul has already mentioned is reading the questions super carefully. I've worked with people and they've shown me that they know how to do the maths, but because they don't read the question properly or they don't understand what technique they're applying to the question, they often get it wrong. So I think kind of just deciphering the question is as much a skill as it is knowing the maths for functional skills. So just do as many practice papers as you can, do as many techniques as you can to make sure you understand the question, whether it's underlining, circling things, drawing little diagrams, rewriting notes, whatever you need to do. Just really work on kind of making sure you understand what the question wants from you. That would be my main tip, I think. Brilliant, thank you, Sam. Now, Eamon, has Sam stolen your one?
No, I was hoping I would go first so he wouldn't steal it, but no, he didn't. My top tip would be, it's normally the second to last question or the final one, the graph, and it is my biggest bug. Please label your axes, have a look at what the question is asking from you when you're doing that graph, because a lot of my learners forget to put a title in, label the axes, they forget to plot the actual points. So if it's 6 points, make sure you're putting 6 points on the graph, and it's quick, easy marks. So if it's a 6-mark question, that's 3 to 4 marks you've nailed by just putting a title. The graph is to show how many cans are sold in, I don't know, 10 months, for example. But just, yeah, make sure you're reading that exam that exam question towards the end, and it's in every single mock paper, and pretty much 90% of the ones I've marked, people are just losing quick marks from not labeling the axes. So yeah. So can I jump in there as well, because on the back of what you've said, and again, Sophie, if this steals what you're about to say, I'm really sorry. But it's a really good point, actually, because the way the papers are structured, they're always the same. You get the kind of the quicker questions for question 1 and 2, and your longer questions at the end. And obviously you've got non-calculated papers to do as well. So a lot of people find they get to the last like 3 or 4 questions and they're exhausted. They turn the page and you've got this like page-long question which is worth 6 marks, which is terrifying, and
you've lost the will to live by that point.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got that much kind of stamina, you can do the questions in the different order. So you can start with the harder questions and do kind of some of the first questions later. So you don't have to do it in the kind of order they give you.
You may not have stolen Sophie's, but you have stolen one of mine, Sam, but I'll let you that.
Very cool.
Sophie, we had a few there, so don't feel if you haven't got anything to add. Anything you would add from just from what you've seen experienced?
Well, it sort of goes in line with what Sam said. You don't have to do the questions in the order that they're given to you. So when invigilating, I see a lot of people, they get stuck on one question and they can spend 15, 20 minutes on that one question, and it's only worth like, okay, it's worth like 4 or 5 marks, but you've got other questions where you can spend your time, you can pick it up, and then they run out of time and they're like, oh, I got really stuck on that one question. It's like, the test does give you the option to flag your questions.
Mm-hmm.
So at the bottom where it says, you can go next question or back a question, there's a little flag button. If you do read through the question and go, I have no idea what that's asking me, just flag it, come back to it later after you've gone through the questions that you can answer, and then you've got the time then to focus on it, and you're not worrying about, oh, I've still got all these other questions I need to get through. And
brilliant, Sophie. It made me realise I've missed that off mine, because that's a tip I give regularly, so I've forgotten it on the next slide. But you're right, and one of the things that I think I have seen people do and heard people do before is do exactly that, struggle on the question and spend 10 minutes on it and still not know the answer before they go on. Well, all you've done then is panicked yourself because you don't know it and wasted 10 minutes. And actually, if you look at it and go, I can't do that, and move on, then if you come back to the end and you still can't do it, you've not lost anything at all. You've not lost in any way. You can then, maybe you will speak 10 minutes then and you will be able to do it. Or maybe there's a question later on that just reminds you how to do that when you jump back to it. But you're right, staring at a blank screen for 10 minutes is not going to help anybody. All it's going to do is get you more and more worried. So that's definitely a key one. And again, apologies, people have heard this before, but when I did my what's called key skills, which is a precursor to functional skills, it used to be 40 questions, I think it was. And on my first run through them, I answered about 6 questions, because any that just looked a bit hard or I couldn't be bothered thinking about, I just left. And what I did was a 6 that I knew instantly without having to work it out, I could just do. So then I went back and did the slightly harder ones, and I'd probably done 20 by then, and then did it again, made sure I did the harder ones towards the end because there were more points. And that is, you're very, very welcome to do that. So just because I'm aware of time, I'm just going to skip through to mine then and say, and they're not really copyrighted, okay. So mine, and we've said there, read the question, look at all the intricacies, and once you've answered the question, read it again and check that you've actually answered what they've asked you for. Check the number of marks, and it goes a little bit onto what Sophie and Eamon were saying there, that you do tend to get the higher number of marks are towards the end of the test. So as Sam said, you do all the tests and think, oh great, I've only got one question left and I've only got 3 minutes, but it's only one question. And then suddenly you realise that's a 6-mark question and you've spent a long time looking at the 1-mark questions, then that's not useful. So I have known people go straight to the end. The questions at the end shouldn't be any harder, but they do have more to them. So a 6-mark question might be easier than a 1-mark question. There's just 6 things to do rather than 1 thing to do. So yeah, if you do want to skip to those and just be aware of the number of marks. And also, if it's a 1-mark question, you found it really easy or really straightforward, I should say, maybe that's right. If it's a 6-mark question, you found it really straightforward and you did it in a minute, maybe you've missed something, you've misunderstood something. So look at the number of marks and think of what they're looking for. Show your working is key. As I said, if you're 100% sure you've got the answer right, you may not need to show your map working. But actually, going back to that example I showed before, if you hadn't shown your working to show £8.89, you just give the answer no, you would have lost out on 3 marks. So it is important to show your working. I do appreciate time can be difficult, and if you're doing things on pen and paper and then you've got to transfer them to computer, that can be difficult. But bear in mind what I said, you don't need to put everything down and every minor detail. Just give the marker, if you like, a narrative of what you've done. Keep track of time, as we mentioned there. Don't think, well, it's okay, I've done all them questions, I've only got 3 questions left and I've only got 5 minutes, it's fine, because actually they're going to be harder questions at the end, so keep a track of that. And don't panic. Very, very easy to say in a test, but you wouldn't be going forward for your test unless you're at a stage where you could do it. You will have done a practice test and shown that you're working at a level. And so the worst thing you can do is get yourself worried and get yourself panic and then not give a true reflection of your ability. Which again, I know is very easy to say, and you're probably sitting there thinking, yeah, that's all right for you to say when I do that test and that time's ticking down. I do appreciate it's a stressful situation, but the best thing you can do is think, well, I'm not going to stress about it. I know my ability in this, and if I read a question, it's really hard, I'm just going to leave it and come back to it later and not spend my time panicking about it. So then will be my tips, and you obviously had some from the others as well. We'll stay around and answer any questions if you've got them individually, but what I wanted to go through this was explain what the test is about. know some of the common mistakes that were mentioned, certainly from the Chief Examiner report, is very useful to know, and recognise some of those key terms, particularly explain or describe, approximate and check. And obviously we've gone through a model answer and the kind of information you would put in a question. The other, I suppose, tip, and Sam said it before, is the more practice questions you can do, the better. It's hard to replicate that real life situation of doing a test, but the more questions you see, the more practicing you do, it will put you in a better situation for the real test. So thanks very much for listening. I hope that was useful. If you are due to take your test soon, then good luck with it, and obviously speak to myself or your tutor, and we'll support you right up to the test as much as we can. But I will stay around if there's any questions, and if not, thanks very much for joining.